Hello, everyone. This is Jeremy Coho, Technical Marketing Engineer at Cisco Systems. Today, I have an update on the Cisco YANG Suite for Release 3. Specifically, I'm going to talk about some new integrations around Ansible playbooks and SNMP to YANG, as well as some options for installing the tool through pip, as well as through Docker. So I'm going to start today just with a recap of the tool. I'll talk a little bit about what's new, some of the new innovation. We'll do a demo of the Ansible integration, and I'll share some resources with you as well. So what is Cisco YANG Suite, right? So I've been talking about this for a couple of years now. It's a YANG API testing and validation environment. And by YANG API, really I'm referring to the NetConf, RESTCONF, and gNMI API microservices that are backed by YANG data models. Right? We've done a lot of talking about YANG and OpenConfig and some of the various features within the APIs. And YANG Suite is the tool that lets us test and validate and make sure that the API and the switch is working in the way that we expect it to, and that we're getting the data back that we expect. Now, we've recently updated some of the landing pages, the developer.cisco.com/YANG-Suite, as well as the github.com/cisco-devnet/YANG-Suite. That's where we have the actual code and some code samples stored as well. Now, when we're using the Cisco YANG Suite tooling, we often use it within the iOS XE device programmability and automation lifecycle. And that's shown here on the screen. It's basically broken into 4 separate components. And YANG Suite really fits in well to day 1 and day 2. Day 1 being the core API, the model-driven programmability, which is essentially NetConf, RESTCONF, and gNMI, as well as in day 2 for the model-driven telemetry for actually receiving and testing and validating that the telemetry subscriptions that we configure are as we expect them to. We get the data back, and then we can go and then put these payloads or configurations into other systems. Now, when we're working with YANG Suite, we're working with the YANG-based APIs. We're typically working against the Cisco Catalyst 9000 switching portfolio, led by the Cisco Catalyst 9300 or 9300X as the flagship switching or stackable switching product. But of course, iOS XE also runs on the wireless portfolio family, as well as on the routing, as well as some IoT devices. So there's quite extensive support for iOS XE within the campus and enterprise network. Now, when we're getting back to YANG Suite and what's been included or what have we already released, in the initial release almost 2 years ago now, that's when we first released the tool publicly, which included support for Docker install with HTTPS. So that's a 3 Docker container system. And in this third release, we're giving you some flexibility in those install options here. So now, in addition to Docker, you also have the pip install mechanism. So we'll talk a little bit about that coming up. In the second release, one of the major innovations that we delivered there was the Python integrations. So you could generate a payload with NetConf or RESTCONF or gNMI in YANG Suite, and you can save that as a Python file, and then you can repeatedly execute that Python file as needed. Now, in the third release, we're continuing some integrations here, but instead of Python this time, now we have Ansible playbook integrations. So you can easily generate the playbooks in YANG Suite and then move those into your Ansible orchestration system. There's some other innovation that's happened here, primarily around the SNMP to YANG-XPATH mapping. So we'll see just a screenshot example of that, of how we can help migrate from some of the legacy SNMP systems to some of the next-gen YANG or XPath-based telemetry or APIs. So as I mentioned, the pip install support. So in addition to this 3 Docker container system now, you can just have a regular pip install mechanism. So if your prerequisites are met, if you already have Python 3.7 or 3.8, you already have pip and the Python environment or virtual environment available, then you should be able just to follow a couple easy steps here to go and activate that virtual environment, use pip to install the tool, and then just run it like always. Now, some of the main innovation that we're delivering here is the integration with Ansible. So with NetConf and RESTCONF and gNMI, we can go into YANG Suite, we can generate the payload, we can send it, but we can also export it to this Ansible playbook that we can then go move on to another system and use repeatedly or hook it up to CI/CD or some other sort of orchestration. Now, the other main feature that we're delivering here in the third release is the SNMP to YANG migration mapping. So as you can see here, we can access the tool from Analytics and then the SNMP to YANG mapping section. From here, we can put in a SNMP-OID, and we can run that OID and understand what's the data that's coming back from that. And then we can do the same workflow against the Yang-based APIs, primarily against NetConf. You can select the data model, we can run the XPath, and we can compare the OID to the XPath to understand if we're getting similar or the same type of data back from these two different APIs. Now, let me just talk briefly about some resources before we move into the demo. So as far as resources go, we've got a couple blogs talking about the new innovation. We have a bunch of links within each of these blogs that point you to some hands-on environments and some code samples. But we also have a bunch of YouTube videos as well that you can watch, primarily episode 9 and episode 58 from the Cisco DevNet Snack Minute have a really good overview of the first and second release. But we have some other videos that just talk about just use cases and using the tool and solving some problems with the Yang-based APIs. Okay, so let's actually just move over to the demo before we get into the recap here. So I'm in the browser now, and I've loaded up the Yang set, and I've loaded the OpenConfig system data model. You can see when the tree view is loaded for this, we can actually see that there's a couple config leafs that are available to us. And the one that we're going to be working with today is hostname. We're going to be reconfiguring the hostname. So essentially, the workflow here is to configure the type of operation that we want, which is going to be a set, right? So we can say that we want the new hostname to be configured by gNMI. And what we can do next is build this RPC, build this payload, right? And this payload tells us that we're going to go into OpenConfig system config, and we're going to change the hostname leaf to this value here, configured by gNMI. Now, if I run this right away, that's going to take effect. But what I actually want to do here is go into replace and generate this Ansible playbook. So when I click that generate Ansible playbook, we have some settings here for the file name to use, right? So we can just call this Ansible playbook.yaml. Right, we can put the task name in here and the playbook name. I'm just going to leave these as defaults. And we can go ahead and download this playbook. Right, let's actually move over to the Ubuntu where I have Ansible installed and where I have this playbook available for us. So here I am in my pod environment. I just got it pre-staged just a moment ago. And if we're looking in the Ansible folder, we see that we actually have this YANG Suite Ansible folder, where I have examples from gNMI, NetConf, and from RESTCONF. So let's continue on this example with gNMI, and we'll see that there's a couple files in here. Primarily, we have this Ansible config that tells us just some basics and some defaults for how to work with this Ansible tool. The next main thing here is the inventory file, right? So those who are familiar with working with Ansible, we're probably going to have a pretty complex or sophisticated inventory file. In this case, we just have our one device here at 10.1.1.5, and we specify the gNMI port that we're going to be using, which is 50052. That's the default non-secured port. So what's the next and the last thing to look at here is the actual YAML file. This is the thing that we just generated in our browser window and just copied it over behind the scenes here. So when we look at this config file, or this YAML file, we have some documentation in here from YANG Suite, right? YANG Suite has provided this to us, and it's given us some instructions about configuring the Ansible config file and the inventory, right? Those are the two files that I just reviewed. And now we actually get to the playbook itself, right? And this is the main component here, where we say that we're going to use this gNMI RPC to go into system config hostname, and we're going to change that value to configured by gNMI. So let's go ahead and run this tool now. We call it like Ansible playbook, and then we just say the YAML file that we want, which is set hostname. So I'm just going to run this. It'll take a moment just to log in, make the session to this device, and change the hostname on it. So you can see here that I've already just logged into this switch, right? 10.1.1.5. That's the same IP that we saw in the inventory file. We had the credentials in there, and what we see here now is that Ansible is connecting, right? I've turned the terminal monitor on here. So we can see what the Ansible tool is actually doing, right? It's actually going in, giving this config terminal lock, and then we see that the host name here actually gets updated, right? Configured by gNMI. So when I just send a couple return keys here, now we actually see that the host name is no longer showing as C9300, and it's now showing as configured by gNMI. And that's kind of what we know here from looking at this other window where we're actually running the playbook file, is that everything's green. It's telling us that it's okay. right? We actually see, the same stuff that we put in, which is to configure the host name. And we get the OK message, and we get the changed message, indicating us that the host name was actually changed. So this is just a really quick, really brief demo of using YANG Suite to generate a payload, taking that payload, saving it as an Ansible playbook file, and then running and executing that playbook file to actually make a change against the device from our Ansible tool. Okay, so with that, let's close up here. What did we do here? We got an understanding of YANG Suite, right? We just got a recap of what we delivered in the first, second, and third releases. We talked in detail about what's new. I shared just a couple slides there, including the demo of the gNMI Ansible integration. And then just shared some resources with you so you can know where to go to find more information to get your hands on the tool, and as well as how to engage with us. So with that, let me just say thank you for watching the video, and let us know how it goes with Cisco YANG Suite. Bye-bye.